Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I am excited to be here today with Tom Critchlow, a writer who I've been following for a number of years and who is also running his own practice. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Will. Excited to be here.
So, Tom, I thought we could start with a piece that you wrote recently that really caught my eye, which was Strategy Rejecting Specialization. I don't think that's the full title, but that was like my key takeaway, which is opposite of the advice that many people give independent consultants, which is, define your niche, define what it is, what problems you solve, what clients you want to work on, and define it very carefully and make sure you communicate that to everyone. You have different advice. Tell me about it.
Yeah. I've tried to take a bit of a contrarian view with my writing, and I think that this really started from seeing a lot of different independent consultants kind of burning out. A lot of people launching their independent consulting practice or trying to go into freelancing and just feeling like the whole thing was a bit of a grind. And this kind of common advice, this perceived wisdom that you'll find all over the internet, which says you should find a specialization, pick a niche, you'll get more clients that way, you'll make more money, all this kind of stuff. I think counterintuitively, sometimes that advice is actually the wrong advice because positioning is really hard. And I think one of the big mistakes that people make is they kind of fence themselves into this box, right? So if you create a positioning, for example, like I do email marketing for e-commerce websites, or I do SEO consulting for B2B sites, right? What you're accidentally doing, you're making your work legible, but you're also putting your work in a box, right? So the kind of clients that are going to hire you are the kind of clients who have like a well-defined need. They're like, oh, I'm an e-commerce website. I have an SEO need. I'm going to hire this consultant. But at this point, it's kind of fungible, right? Like they might hire you, they might hire somebody else, they might hire an agency. You're basically accidentally optimizing for work that is straightforward, legible, interchangeable, right? And that just leads to, sometimes it can lead to more work, right? Because you've got a good positioning, if you figured out who your audience is, your clients, and so on. But it's all kind of low-level work. It's not super senior work. It's not really well paid. You're constantly fighting against other vendors, other consultants, and so there's this kind of trap, right? If you over specialize or don't do your kind of positioning statement well, there's this danger that you're just going to end up burning out, right? It becomes a grind. And so I try to take this kind of alternative perspective to say, there is another way to do this, which is you don't really need to pick a niche as much as you need to have strong opinions. And so this is kind of the basis for the piece that I wrote, which basically says, try not to put yourself into a box, right? And say, I do X for Y. But instead, if you can have strong opinions and if you can kind of demonstrate a kind of vibe, as I like to call it, a kind of a kind of persona and a kind of way of thinking, then you're going to attract the kind of work and the kind of clients who appreciate that way of thinking and appreciate that vibe. And you're going to attract clients who have problems where they say, I don't actually know what my problem is, right? Or I have this kind of it's like not well-defined problems, ambiguous problems, messy problem. Maybe you can help, right? And in my own experience, those kinds of consulting jobs tend to be more senior, more well-paid, more fun, more interesting, and also less competitive, right? You're no longer pitching against just an SEO agency or an email marketing agency or some other consultant. And it's really just about somebody on the internet who finds your stuff and is like, I want to work with this guy. He seems interesting. It seems like we think on the same wavelength. I think maybe he can help. So that was kind of the basis for the whole thesis. I think positioning can still be a useful tool if you do it really well, but I think it can also be a bit of a trap.
Okay. So a lot of areas to explore here. So strong opinions. Give us some examples of what you're talking about there.
Good question. So in my own work, for example, I used to do SEO consulting work. This kind of strong opinion would be, I don't believe that SEO audits are useful. And that's kind of, a belief that I've come to from many years working in the industry, where every SEO agency and every SEO consultant will try and sell you an SEO audit, quote unquote. And I just think that whole process is fundamentally broken, right? You're starting from a kind of process-driven approach to consulting rather than a problem-driven approach, which says, what is your problem? What are your opportunities? That'd be one example. Another example might be something like, you believe in the creator economy or something, and you want to you believe the brands should be investing in kind of influencer partnerships rather than doing like TV ads. You can have all kinds of opinions. Again, I think the magic is often in the nuance of them, that kind of explains that you have a particular kind of way of viewing the world that is a little bit unique or a little bit different.
Okay, so so let's say you express strong opinions, right? And you get people who think, "Wow, I like the way this person thinks." It seems to me that you need to at least have some degree of explaining what it is you do, because you probably wouldn't want someone coming to you say, "Tom, I like the way you think. I need a help on a supply chain transformation effort or something." I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
that is
sure.
outside of my space. So, I mean, you would probably need to have, I do something related to digital marketing and SEO, but or whatever your space is, right? But you can't people need to know at least broadly when to call you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and actually, I think people, I think more than that, actually, I think that people often rely too much on um, kind of like building like a services page on their website, which says, I do SEO, I do content marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you're trying to fit your work into a box. In my experience, I really enjoy writing these lengthy blog posts, right? Sometimes these essays are like, 2, 3, 4,000 words. And in them, I'm given these little vignettes of the work that I do. And I might say something like, this one time I was working with a CMO and they had to, build out an SEO team. And so I helped them hire, 5 to 10 people in their SEO department, blah, 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 blah. This gives this kind of really strong mental model for somebody reading that to be like, oh, I have a really rich understanding of what that work looks like, right? I haven't got a label necessarily, like quote unquote SEO consulting or email marketing or whatever it might be, but I suddenly have a kind of sense of when I might make an intro to Tom or when I might reach out to work with Tom, right? So yes, you absolutely need this kind of clear sense of the kind of things that you do, but again, giving them a kind of tight label isn't always the right approach, right? So yes, I think again, this comes back to this idea of if you're going to have strong opinions, and my favorite medium is text. I like to write a lot. If you're going to write long essays, or if you're going to do YouTube videos or whatever it is, I think it's great to embody that stuff with real examples, right? And these little kind of vignettes and case studies of the work that you've done. And I think that allows the what you're talking about, right? Which is this kind of giving clients a sense of what it is that you do, without again having to resort to this kind of like putting yourself in a box, right? It's like I have a page on my website that says I do SEO consulting and you can hire me through that. It's just that kind of path is, I'm not saying it doesn't work, I just think it leads to a different kind of work.
Okay. So a good friend of mine and someone I respect a lot, David A. Fields, he's been on the show here a bunch of times. He has a concept which is, just I think some degree opposed to what you recommend, which is the idea of having a fishing line, right? Having a crisp explanation, not necessarily of what you do, but his way of framing that is, I work with this type of client who are struggling with like this type of problem, right? So it's not so much exactly saying I do SEO, but in some cases, and I'm not sure actually if you necessarily disagree with this approach or not, because they might be saying something similar. So that kind of fishing line, I don't think necessarily bounds you in to a tight, low-end kind of commodity box, because it can be framed in a way that's something like, I work with mid-market CPG companies that have sort of achieved high market share in their niche and are now struggling to find new growth paths, right? So that could be pretty high value work. That's sort of strategy work for mid-market CPG companies. It's strategic. It's working with the senior leadership. It's not like a commodity thing, but it does give people a sense of roughly what you do. And if you meet someone at a cocktail party and you say that, they might remember it, and 6 months later they have a friend who has a $300 million snack bar company and know to refer you. So if you're taking your approach and you meet someone at a party, what would you tell them about yourself? You can't say, hey, read everything I've written for the past 10 years and you get my vibe, right? Like, what would you tell people in a snapshot to let them know when they should, introduce someone to you?
Yeah. A good question. So first of all, I don't disagree with that. I think that's good advice, and I like the framing there. One of the caveats I write in my blog post in rejecting specialization is that I try and make the distinction between like good positioning and like great positioning and mediocre positioning, right? And I think the part of the problem here is that like good positioning is really useful and can be done really well, but the problem is that most people can't do it. Right, they spin their wheels, or they don't have a good enough understanding, or they can't define their market well enough. So if you can get to a statement like you just described, I think that is useful, and I think that's great. And if you can do it, especially if you can do it through the right senior lens, then I think you are going to attract some of the right kind of clients. In my blog post, I use the example of Andy Raskin, who I think has really great positioning, which is I think his line, I might be butchering it, but something like I do strategic narrative for CEOs. And it's kind of, that's at once a kind of tight positioning, whilst also being wide enough to drive a bus through, and senior enough that obviously you're going to get all kinds of ambiguous, interesting projects, right? But again, I think a lot of people will see that advice, and they'll see the advice to create a positioning statement and end up putting themselves in a box, right? So I think good positioning can absolutely work. And to answer your question directly, the line that I have been using for a while is I help content companies start new initiatives. And that's kind of been the kind of one-liner version. But honestly, I don't think that captures, like, I don't think I've created a strong positioning statement yet, right? I don't think I've nailed that fishing line as you kind of describe it, because I think that there's still a lot of ambiguity in the work that I do, and it's also evolving, right? I think the other aspect here is that a positioning statement feels like it feels like it is a static thing, whereas a lot of independent consultants are continually trying to change the work they're doing, move into new industries, try new types of work, get new types of clients. It feels more alive and more iterative. And I think that, again, when you try and, it's almost like putting a firefly in a glass jar. It's like if you're trying to cement it like a moment in time into this positioning statement, it can feel like you're trapping yourself versus giving yourself optionality and kind of freedom to move, which again was kind of the thrust of my piece, which is like there's this other way to think about it, which is by writing, by having strong opinions, you can kind of evolve your point of view and your positioning over time.
What benefits have you derived from writing consistently? You've been doing it now for 10 years. You have a ton of stuff on your web. Just printing out the list of posts is 14 pages. Talk to me about what benefits you've received from all that work.
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of benefits. I mean, the last full-time job I had when I worked I was interviewing at Google, almost a decade ago now. I remember there were several of my pieces of writing that came up in the interview process. They were like, "Oh, tell me about this thing that you wrote," or I would say, "Oh, I wrote a blog post about this. Can I email it to you after the interview?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So even in kind of more straightforward things like like job searches and career searches, it's been helpful. I know that when I was running an agency in New York over a decade ago now, makes me feel old. When I first moved to New York, I was running an agency, and writing was one of the ways that I attracted people to apply to the jobs. One of my closest friends, who was one of the guys who joined my team when I opened the office here in New York, he applied to the job because he read a post that I wrote and was like, "I like how this guy thinks. I want to go work for him." So those are some of the kind of more straightforward benefits. And then, above and beyond that, obviously, as an independent consultant, it's generated a lot of work. A lot of people reach out because they know me through my writing. We're having this conversation right now because of my writing. I've also, tons of friends, kind of less easy to quantify, but certainly valuable interactions from all kinds of different people. Even just moving to New York City itself, I remember when I first moved here, and feeling like I don't know anyone, never been here before, but I feel like I can hit the ground running because I can reach out to folks. People are reaching out to me. I can find a network. I can find people. I've been toying with this idea recently of, people think that blogging and kind of being active on social media, they think about it as kind of quote unquote building your audience. And I think that phrase is a really bad phrase, right? It kind of conjures ideas of people being put into marketing funnels and like marketing activities and so on. But when you use the phrase finding your people, I think everyone wants to find their people. right? And I think that's the thing that writing has done for me. Is it's allowed me to find my people. It's allowed me to find people that think the way that I do, that are interesting, that are doing interesting things. And yeah, I wouldn't replace that for the world.
All right, so just a podcast timeout here. On that note, I'll just say hello, people who who have who are interested in Unleashed and following the show. So, okay, back to our regular programming. So, and to what degree have you found that beyond all those relationship benefits, the kind of consistency and the habit of doing that, has it helped clarify your thinking or help you even discover what it is that you think?
Yeah, totally. I've been I have a blog where I write all kinds of things all over the shop, and there's a kind of a certain slice of my blogging which is specifically about independent consulting, which hopefully is going to turn into a book-shaped object sometime soon. I'm about there in terms of the number of words, and I just need to do some editing and so on. But writing about independent consulting has been this. It kind of accidentally really generative thing for me. I started it by accident. I wrote a single blog post. I think it was called like a field guide to independent consulting, and it was because a friend of mine had reached out and was like, "What do you know about independent consulting? Like, I'm thinking of doing it myself. What do I need to know?" So I wrote a blog post with a bunch of bullet points, just kind of jotting down some thoughts, and it did really well. And from there, I thought I should write more about independent consulting. I'm really interested in this thing. It's for want of a better term, it's my career now. And so maybe I should be interested in it. I should take an interest and read what others have written. And so over the last like 6 years or so, I've been kind of focused on writing about independent consulting. And what that's accidentally done for me is it means that every single client engagement that I get, I can put through this kind of generative lens to say, what new things have I learned about the practice of independent consulting? And it's allowed me to reframe what otherwise I think can sometimes be or can feel like a bit of a grind, like the hamster wheel, right? You one client in front of another. Okay, this client's ended. I got to go get a new client. Starts to feel the same. Starts to feel like a job, and instead, by looking at it through this kind of meta game, to say, what is the practice of independent consulting? How do I I know about it? And then every new client I can kind of think of as building on that body of knowledge. Accidentally, I didn't do this on purpose, but accidentally, that's a really great way for me to stay engaged and active in the work that I'm doing, and not tune out, not feel like it's just another client, it's just another job, but to feel like I'm actually interested in the work that I'm doing, all the way up to most recently in the last kind of 12 months, I've really started reading kind of academic papers about independent consulting and strategy consulting, which again has been another way to kind of keep myself interested in the practice, right? Again, I think I've been an independent consultant now for almost 8 years. When you've been doing it a while, I think you can just feel, you want to keep things fresh, you want to keep things interesting, and so writing for me, to come back to your original question, writing has been this way for me to keep myself interested, to explore how I think, to clarify my own thinking, and also just to, pressure test these assumptions against other people, right? Again, the idea of writing on the internet, working in public, allows other people to give me their opinions and say, "Yo, you're wrong. I disagree with this," or "Oh, I really like that thing you wrote. That really resonates with me," and so on.
So we obviously started this conversation talking a bit about strategy and positioning. Beyond that, talk to me about some of your other strong opinions that you formed over the years about independent consulting. That's the world of me and my listeners, and I'm curious to hear kind of your strong opinions and maybe how they've evolved over time.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I come to believe quite strongly, when I first, especially working in the marketing field, when I first stepped out on my own as an independent consultant, I relied very heavily on frameworks. There's a lot of like, I'm going to use the jobs to be done methodology, or I'm going to use this, hub hero habit framework that I read in a blog post or whatever. And I feel like you lean quite heavily on these frameworks because, I think every strategy consultant knows that a framework is a really useful tool. You go into a client and it's not just like, hey, I've got some ideas, but you want to have like a framework behind you, or a methodology, or some kind of rigor to what you're doing. And so you reach for these frameworks that you've heard about or you've used before, and so on. And then I did a workshop with Jan Chipchase. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's been a big kind of inspiration for me. He is an independent consultant, but does kind of in-field ethnographic research, often in difficult to reach places all around the world. And I did a workshop with him on doing user research and how it all works and so on. And there was this really interesting thing that he did in his work, where he showed doing a kind of ethnographic field study. Right, I think they were working with rice farmers in Myanmar, and they were in the field for a week, whatever. Team of researchers doing interviews, and over that week, they basically put all of these pieces of paper up on the wall in their studio, and over the week, these kind of frameworks emerged where it was like, this is the way that rice farmers think about the value of crops. And it was like, 4 different categorizations of the way that these rice farmers think about crops. Or I'm going to butcher some of the other examples. I can't remember them off the top of my head. But there were these kind of really simple frameworks, right? And they're frameworks, but they were completely original and tied specifically to the problem and the work that they were looking at. And that was a big inspiration for me, where I've realized that frameworks that you pull off the shelf are usually overly generic and not really fit for purpose. And I, on the other hand, doing things like simple categorizations is really powerful. And so I've tried to push my own work further away from things that are generic and sound useful, sound nice and flashy, but ultimately just aren't that applicable, aren't that useful. And instead doing things like, what if we just, I do a lot of digital stuff, right? So you're looking at websites and you say, what if we just segment all of your content into 3 buckets? And we're going to call these buckets, A, B, and C, or this type of content, that type of content. But we're going to do it based on our business and our understanding of the problem in front of us, and so on. And when you can do that, I find it's just so much more useful. And you lose a little bit of that kind of flashiness, right? Because the framework that everyone's heard about has a fancy name, and there's probably fancy graphics that you can pull for it off the internet. But it's just not. I just find it's more useful when you can get to the real specifics of what you're looking at. And ironically, I think people like McKinsey have been doing this for years, right? Like when you look at a McKinsey presentation, there's almost always that kind of dull, boring looking kind of like segmentation or kind of a categorization in there, and I think I'm finally starting to get an appreciation for how powerful that is.
What are your strong opinions about pricing and fees?
So again, playing the contrarian aspect a little bit, again, the kind of accepted wisdom that you'll read about on the internet is that you should never trade time for money. Value pricing is the thing that you should be aiming for. I'm not necessarily convinced that that's wrong, but I also think that trading time for money can be fine. I've been doing this for 8 years, and almost all of my consulting is still based on a day rate. The client says, I want to do this project. I say, that sounds like 3 days a week, or that sounds like 15-day projects. I'm back into a day rate and then back into a price from there, and so on. And that seems to be working fine for me. Again, maybe I'm leaving money on the table by not doing value pricing, but I think that it can be totally fine. And I think in particular, if you're doing some of the ambiguous work that I talked about at the beginning, right? This kind of idea of working with clients when we're not even sure what the problem is yet. Sometimes I feel like basing the project on time and days, it gives you more freedom to work around the problem, to work on different aspects of it, to do different types of work and so on, because you're not tied to a specific scope. You're not necessarily saying this project is me delivering the following 3 projects, but instead you're saying I'm just gonna do a bunch of work for you across a bunch of different things, and that's going to be helpful because we don't know what we don't know yet. We don't know what the problems are. We don't know what the solution is going to look like. So again, I think part of the whole thesis for the book that I'm writing about independent consulting is you have to take a contrarian viewpoint, and you have to craft a setup that works for you. And I think a lot of the generic advice that you read is that it's generic, right? And it isn't always going to work for you. So again, I think it isn't that value pricing is wrong, but I think that I don't think we should be so black and white about trading time for money.
So on that one, I agree with you. So I don't know if that makes us both contrarians or if we're just agreeing with each other. But I think that value pricing can be great. My friend David Fields is a big proponent of it. I find that in practical terms, in the independent world, kind of a daily rate is easy to understand for the client. It's more flexible if they want to extend it a little bit or end it a little early, if they want to change the scope of it or change direction. It just makes a lot of things easier. So it certainly helps you get an SOW signed like with a
Yep.
lot less hassle. And instead of trying to fuss around up front about exactly defining the scope. So I think there's a lot to be said for daily rate. Usually I don't like hourly rates. That feels like then you're starting to measure your lunch break or whatever. But
I would agree with that. Yeah, hourly rates start to get a bit much, but I think day rates are pretty flexible.
yeah, so okay. So I'm not sure if I'm a contrarian or we both are
Yeah.
on that one. What about business development? What are some of your thoughts on that piece? It sounds like you've had some inbound flow from your writing, which is awesome. What's your thoughts about just how to reach out to former clients, reach out to potential clients? Like, how do you go about it? What's your thoughts around that piece, which is one of the biggest struggles, obviously, for a lot of independent consultants?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think writing for me is probably 95% of my deal flow, one way or another, right? Not necessarily writing as in generating kind of brand new clients out of thin air, but writing as a way to engage people I already know or to build relationships with people that I know a little bit, to stay top of mind for people. I think generally writing has been the way that almost all my clients kind of start, or I should say, conversations off the back of writing, right? It isn't just the writing itself, but the conversations and so on that happen around it. I don't think that is. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I think not everyone feels as comfortable writing. Not everyone can write all the time. It works for me, and so I've kind of settled into that groove. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but I'll say it again, which is, I think having strong opinions is really valuable, and having strong opinions paired with these kind of vignettes of the actual work, right? I was just talking to a friend of mine just recently who is just about to launch an independent consulting studio. They just had a full-time job. They've gone back into independent consulting, and I was chatting with him about the brand of his independent consulting, a new website he's launching, and some of his writing. And I was like, show me the work, right? Like he is one of the best people that I've ever worked with in terms of kind of positioning and branding. But he has an incredible commercial eye, right? He actually understands where positioning and branding meet product development, product roadmaps, and kind of the actual business model of his clients, which is very unusual. I think a lot of people that do positioning work, stay at that kind of positioning level, and they don't always understand the kind of practicalities of the commercial side of the business. And I was trying to explain to him, I was like, you've got to show that in action. You've got to show a bit more of the actual work. Calling yourself a positioning consultant is fine, but you're going to miss what makes you special. You're going to miss the magic, right? So again, I think that idea of writing, having the opinions, and showing those vignettes of the actual work in action, the perspectives in the action, the case studies and so on, and trying to get to that richness, right? Trying to get below the surface level of just, I did a project with this client, but actually getting into like, we had this challenge and we navigated it this way, or the work ended up feeling like this. I think that's the stuff that makes other clients kind of lean forward and pay attention, right? They're like, oh, I have those same challenges, or I would love somebody who thinks that way. A lot of this is a phrase that I hear a lot with clients that come to me, is they find me for whatever means, and then when they reach out and we have that conversation, they're like, there was just something about the way that you think that I liked. It's like this kind of idea of like we were on the same page already, even though we haven't met or we don't know each other well. It's like they can trust that we think the same way about problems. And I think that for senior projects in particular, that's what they want. They don't necessarily want solutions. They want somebody who can think the same way that they can. So again, you talk about business development. For me, again, a lot of it is writing and having those opinions.
And then do you put it solely on your blog, or do you also distribute that with a newsletter? How do you get in front of people to remind them, about what you're putting out there?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I probably a little bit. It's like the cobbler's shoes. I have an email newsletter. I put stuff on Twitter and LinkedIn, but I'm not particularly diligent about it. A friend of mine, Nigel Green, who's also an independent consultant, he kind of gave me a talking to the other day. He was like, Tom, how many people do you have followers on LinkedIn? And I was like, I don't know, like a few hundred or something. and he just had a whole rant at me. He was like, "This is a huge platform, it's a huge opportunity. Like you have opportunity, you have opinions and writing. Like you should be all over LinkedIn." It's like he's getting millions of views on his stuff, and I think there's definitely opportunities there that I'm probably not capturing. I think that has partly come honestly also from a place of a kind of privilege. Also, like I have clients that I work with. I'm not necessarily starving for work, so I think I probably underinvested in some of those things. But yeah, I think LinkedIn. I think these days is a huge opportunity. I think it's it's a very friendly platform to people that want to post their opinions and share content. I think it's quite easy to get reach these days. So yeah, but for me personally, it's my blog mostly, and then I have an email list that is kind of ad hoc, and Twitter is where I'm probably more active than I should be.
More active than you should be. Let's talk a little bit more about your practice. I think that you said you help content companies start new initiatives. I don't know if I got that word for word. Give us some examples.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this one in passing, but I work with a Fortune 500 company to build out an SEO practice. So they came to me with an SEO team of 3 people, and with the knowledge that they wanted to make that team bigger. And so I work with the CEO and the board to put together a kind of a multi-year plan and a proposal that turned that team into a team of like 45 in the end. So that was at the front end of the project, kind of strategy and putting that proposal and business case together, and then turned into a hiring project. So actually running hiring and interviewing for certainly the most kind of senior heads of what would be that big team. So that was kind of an interesting project, and I think showcased a few different aspects of the work that I do, both from a strategy perspective, understanding SEO perspective, understanding content, but then also kind of building teams and so on. So actually running the interviews, that kind of thing. I worked with a big media publisher to set up a kind of new content marketing practice. So this was a kind of old school media publisher who produced a lot of SEO content, but didn't really understand how to do anything more interesting than that, how to build brand, how to do content marketing. And so I kind of helped them stand up a whole new function, team, division. And again, that was a great example of kind of the ambiguous work that I talk about, because it was a mixture of what should content marketing even look like for us, as well as who do we have across the organization that can help in the early days, and then as the engagement progressed, turning into, okay, who do we hire, what seats do we need, and how do we kind of formalize this thing that we've been doing ad hoc across the organization up until now into its own team, its own unit, and so on. So those are a couple examples. I also did an innovation project with the New York Times that was a little bit different in nature, but was basically saying, we want to build a new vertical. This was perfect timing. This was actually building a new travel vertical on the New York Times, and we did this project in Feb 2020.
Oh, good timing. Good timing.
Yeah. And we were like, look at all the great things we could do in travel. I think we presented it in March. It's like, okay,
via Zoom.
that one didn't really go anywhere, as you might imagine. But that was a really fun project. I really enjoyed there was already an innovation team, an R&D team inside New York Times who was working on some of these ideas, and I came in as some kind of combination of somebody who understands content really well, somebody who understands how to run an innovation project and do new things, but also a kind of a little bit of a safe pair of hands. Like, part of the work that I really enjoy is shaping presentations and shaping narrative. And so again, I think the innovation work, I think that is critical, right? The idea that you have to actually kind of pitch this into various people, explain these ideas that are very fragile and probably untested to some degree, trying to get budget and buy-in and build a kind of roadmap and momentum behind them. So that was a really fun project. But again, as you might expect from the way that I've talked about my work, it varies a lot. There's a lot of different aspects to it. Most recently, I launched a new business called the SEO MBA last year. Which is like an online education and training course for SEO professionals to learn kind of business and leadership skills. So nothing about how to do SEO, but all about how to do the stuff that I just talked about, get budget and buy-in for your ideas. And so most recently, I've been doing some consulting work around that, which looks like training programs and things like that, which has been a slightly different change of pace, but I'm finding really interesting.
Fascinating. So that's a tell us a little bit more about that course. That's is it like a cohort based or is it asynchronous? Or tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a self-paced course, but there is if you buy it at the professional tier, which is kind of the higher tier, I give you one-on-one feedback on the assignments, and there is weekly office hours. So it's a little bit of a blended model between synchronous and asynchronous. And that whole thing came out of that engagement that I just told you about with the Fortune 500 company where I built that big SEO team. When I spent almost a year interviewing senior level SEO professionals for this VP of SEO role, and that there are almost no VP of SEO roles at big companies. So this was a really big role, and I was interviewing a lot of different senior people, almost all of which knew more about SEO than I did. But I just couldn't put them in front of the CEO. None of them could confidently kind of lead a program at that level and manage a team at that level. And it all came to a head where we found this one candidate in particular. We all really liked them, and I went to the CEO and I said, I think we want to hire this person. They're just missing a little bit of that executive presence. That's my only kind of reservation. And the CEO turned to me and was like, what if we hire them and you just teach them that executive presence? And that was a light bulb moment for me where I was like, I just spent a year being frustrated that no one in the industry had these skills. I have those skills and I know that industry, and maybe I can teach these skills to people. And so that was kind of the impetus for me. Suddenly, then I had the name. There's kind of the idea came first, and then I found the name, the SEO MBA, and I was like, all right, this is the thing that I got to do. So it's been really fun. It's been really different change of pace, learning how to shoot video, learning how to put a course together, how to do teaching and training and all that kind of stuff. But it's been really rewarding, and I think it's definitely a gap in the industry. There's a ton of stuff out there that will teach you how to do SEO, but there's almost nothing out there that'll teach you how to present your ideas to a CEO, how to build a business model, how to actually kind of lead a change program inside an organization. Honestly, these things that aren't really specific to SEO, but I'm just teaching them through an SEO lens for an SEO audience. So trying to make all of that stuff that I do day to day and kind of what you would kind of quote unquote call strategy consulting, bring those ideas and those skill sets back to people who work in the SEO industry. It's been fun.
So that's something that individuals can purchase, but you're also offering it sort of as a corporate professional thing, so companies can get their teams to go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't have the exact stats, but I think probably 2/3 of people are expensing it. So 2/3 of people are getting their agency or their company to pay for the course to put them through it. And then obviously you have some teams come to me as a team and say we want a group discount, or we want a live version of the training for our team or whatever it might be. It's just me over here, so I can do all kinds of customization or flexibility. If a team wants a live version of like a cohort-based version of the course for their team of 10, then I can do that for them, do it kind of privately. If people want some kind of other structure, I can do that, one-off training, whatever. So it's kind of, it's led to a bunch of conversations like that. But it's also just been a thing that people can buy either individually or as a team. It's been great. I've really enjoyed putting it out there. It's really, I think the time scale of, or the scale of feedback is very different, right? When you do a good consulting project, you feel like, I really helped this business, launch in a new market or make some big moves or, grow revenues, whatever. And those things feel intellectually satisfying when you do them well. But teaching and training, you get these individual stories. People emailing me like, I just got a new job, or I just presented to the CEO and they loved it, or I feel more confident at work, or these kind of individual one-on-one stories that you get. For me, I don't know if they're better necessarily. They're just different, right? It's just kind of heartwarming to get a different kind of feedback, a different kind of satisfaction from the work itself.
A lot of independent consultants listening to this show, and some of them have built websites for their practice. We actually just published a resource on how to build a website for a consulting practice with about 100 examples.
I just saw that. It was great.
Thank you. What are your tips on SEO for an independent consultant? And maybe I'll preface that by asking, does it even make sense? Like for an individual person, there's kind of two levels, right? So there's one level for a website of just establishing credibility for people that are already checking you out. They're maybe introduced to you, they're going to meet with you. They just look at your website and say, oh yeah, lots of good stuff, services, all right. They've written some stuff on. That's one level of aspiration. The second level of aspiration, a higher level, is for our clients to actually discover you from your website by search. it's a much harder thing to do. Is it really realistic for an independent consultant to strive for that? Should people, think about SEO or maybe just ignore it? Is it just too much? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, with a background in SEO, it's maybe controversial, but I would say that for an independent consultant, SEO is almost never worth it. I think that there are some times when it makes sense, specifically around more on the kind of content side. If there is so less around like people Googling like strategy consultant Brooklyn, but more about maybe people Googling like I don't know, like a content strategy template or something, right? So the bit more on the top of the funnel end. Sometimes you can get a lot of traffic and kind of audience that way and build an email list and so on. But honestly, I would say for most independent consultants, the kind of leads and the kind of audience you're going to build through SEO is not going to be the right kind of audience. It's not going to lead to the right kind of senior work that you want, and it's going to lead any leads you get that way are going to be more, are going to be smaller. They're going to be less well paid, less senior and so on. So I don't think SEO is a big concern, but I do think that content is a huge piece of it, and this will be no surprise from the conversation we just had. But I think your website has to be alive, right? If you imagine that you build a website and it has this, whether you have a tight positioning or whether you have strong opinions, whether it's a really beautiful website or whatever it is, you have to get people to the website, right? And so I think you have to make sure the website is alive. You have to keep putting stuff out there and keep sending people back to the website, right? And I think this is also part of why I think opinions are so useful, is because you got to keep writing. You got to keep putting stuff out there to feel like you have people coming to the website. There's a steady stream of traffic going through and so on. You're giving yourself the kind of the most opportunities for those serendipitous introductions or connections to happen. Somebody to see the website and be like, oh, I'm going to send this to my friend who is running a startup, or I'm going to send this to a friend who just got a new job as a CMO, or whatever it might be. You want those things to happen, and you want to give them the best chance of happening. And so you need people coming to the website. And I think it's not going to happen if you don't write. If you're not putting stuff out on the website, broadly speaking, no one's going to go look at it.
All right. Clarifying point. You said that it's not really worth the investment or the time to focus on SEO. Is that because of A or B? So A could be because, hey, if you're trying to rank for independent consultant for the retail industry, let's say, it's just too hard to get to the first page, so just don't bother. Or are you saying, like, even if you could get to the first page and be the first listing, the kind of person who searches on that term is going to be some crummy small project, like an actual Macy's is not going to just Google for independent retail consultant. So is it more just it's too much trouble and too hard, or is it the kind of flow you'd get is not good?
Definitely the flow is not good. I think there's a little bit that it's also hard for actually, for any keywords that are kind of useful keywords, and it is pretty hard. But I would say no, it's almost all because the kind of leads you get that way and the kind of clients that come through Googling for those kind of terms are not the ones you think, right? I think I rank for independent strategy consultant in some kind of variations of that keyword at times. I don't think anyone, no senior client is going to Google that phrase and land on your website cold and then reach out to you. You're much more likely that it's an introductions based thing. It's all about, like I said before, it's about finding your people, right? It's about finding the right kind of people who are interested in the kind of things you're writing about, and that can permeate itself through Slack groups and via email, LinkedIn, and so on, so that it can kind of land on the right person's desk more than just ranking for these kind of generic terms that I think is generally not the right way to do it.
Okay, interesting. So then, for an independent consultant listening here who has built a website, it sounds like your suggestion is really don't fuss and bother about all the meta tags and all the fussing around with SEO and getting all that stuff perfect. Rather, put your effort and time, which is limited, into just creating actually good content that will help you find your people, that the kind of person you would want to get to know would be interested to read. But don't worry and fuss too much about all the keyword optimization stuff.
Yes, 100%. And the key thing that you just said then is writing for the audience that you want as clients, right? You want to write the kind of thing that the right person is going to want to read. I think too often when people think about content creation and writing, they think about writing for a kind of more junior audience, right? So if you're like a paid media consultant, you might write this like, I'm going to write the definitive thing about how to optimize your Google ads. And it's like, that isn't what a CEO is interested in. A CEO is interested in, should I be pausing my brand spend during COVID, right? Or whatever. And I think that it's less about writing the kind of definitive guide to something. I think about that as being a kind of closed form of content where you're saying, here's the problem start to finish, and I've kind of done it. I've finished this topic. Instead, I like to think about the open style of content, which is like, here's some things that I'm thinking about around these topics, and maybe you're thinking about them too. Maybe I leave the post with some unanswered questions, right? Things that I'm still wondering about or haven't figured out yet. That kind of content I tend to find is much more effective at reaching a more senior audience, demonstrating the way that you think more clearly, giving more of your personality maybe. And I think those things, again, like I said, are more effective at building those that kind of senior level deal flow.
Wow. I feel that we could keep exploring these topics for hours and hours. I want to ask you to share for listeners if they want to learn more about your work, and where would you point them online? And we can include this in the show notes, any links that you want to give here.
Yeah, tomcritchlow.com is where I do pretty much all my writing. That's both got my weird kind of personal blogging and the writing that I do specifically for independent consulting. That is where pretty much everything lives. If you're interested in the SEO MBA, that's just SEOMBA.com, and that's kind of got a very specific kind of focus and whatever. But yeah, it's pretty much all there.
Fantastic. Tom, I really enjoyed this today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed it.